Helpful how? Well, it apparently led to the identity of two suspects, Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef Al-Shehi. Investigators went to Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida, after they identified those two people, where they believe the two men received pilot training. Now, CNN has learned those two men have commercial pilot's licenses. Now, in another part of Florida, in Vero Beach, Florida, the FBI has apparently tracked down the identity of two other suspects. Police searched the homes of Adnan Bukhari and his brother Amir Abbas Bukhari. Law enforcement sources believe they are both Saudi citizens and commercial pilots. One of the addresses listed for them is a post office box in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, at Saudi Airlines. So the bottom line is they have at least 4 suspects, and 4 of those are commercial pilots, Judy.
All right, Mike Boettcher, I know this information is coming in bits and pieces, and we want to try to report it as it comes in. Mike Boettcher, thanks very much. Well, we've been telling you, and our colleagues in New York, Aaron Brown and others have been telling us about those rescue efforts in New York, people literally risking their lives now in order to see if there's anyone left alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center. Right now, CNN's national correspondent Gary Tuchman is on the telephone to tell us what is going on with that building very much at risk. Gary?
Well, Judy, there is a deep feeling of unease in the lower portion of Manhattan tonight. The building is called One Liberty Plaza. It's a very tall, grayish-black building that is just to the east of where the 2 World Trade Center towers were. About 2 hours ago, I was brought to ground zero to see the 1,000 to 1,500 workers who are on the scene working at the wreckage. I was told when I was there they were deeply concerned about that One Liberty Plaza building and another building to the south that has a huge hole in it. These are very brave people. They are walking on top of wreckage, and in some cases is 75 feet tall, lifting up heavy metal with the knowledge that 2 buildings nearby are vulnerable. Well, about 30 minutes after I was there, they started noticing that that One Liberty Plaza building started twisting, and then windows started popping out of the building. Immediately, an evacuation was ordered, and now all 1,000 to 1,500 people have evacuated the area. There is no one at the scene right now participating in the rescue and recovery. In addition, members of the news media who were about 4 or 5 blocks away from the World Trade Center site were told to immediately start moving back a couple of blocks to get farther away from the building. The fear is, and we should make this very clear, there is no evidence this building is coming down. But there is a concern that it could happen. And if the building did come down, and that's still a long shot in my estimation based on talking to people, it could potentially knock down other buildings nearby, creating a very huge problem. And that's why the area has been evacuated. I should tell you, Judy, being at the site, one thing that I must stress, this is a much worse disaster in terms of damage than I ever imagined, even being 4 blocks away. When I got there, we are talking about damage to maybe 100 to 150 businesses that aren't part of the World Trade Center complex, some very substantial. There is debris and damage in a 10-square-block area in each direction from the World Trade Center complex. A morgue has been set up across from the World Trade Center in a damaged Brooks Brothers store. That's where people who have perished have been brought. And there is a center, a triage center, set up in the One Liberty Plaza building. So there might be a concern when you evacuated that building, what happens to the people in the triage center? Well, sadly, there's no one in the triage center because they haven't found any survivors in the past several hours. Judy?
All right, Gary, I want to have one more question I want to ask you, and as I do, I believe we're going to be able to show our viewers some very unusual pictures from the International Space Station. These are pictures of New York City from space. So that now I'm seeing this for the first time, just as you are. The smoke you're able to see is clearly that coming from that area of lower Manhattan that Gary has been reporting on. Gary, I don't think you're in a position to see this, but it certainly does give us the bird's eye view of the city and just one more idea of the incredible devastation wrought by yesterday's acts of terrorism. Gary, one last question while I'm talking to you. How close now are the emergency personnel to the area that of the devastation, given the risk of this One Liberty Plaza building? Are people still in the immediate adjacent area?
I can tell you, Judy, that many of the rescue and recovery workers are standing with me right now, and we're about 4 or 5 blocks away. People aren't getting very close at this point because of the risk. I also wanted to mention, you're talking about the smoke that can be seen from space. It's a surreal sight here because most of us are carrying masks with us and people are walking down the streets wearing masks, wearing bandanas over their face and their nose because too much time spent without the mask or the bandana leaves you with a sore throat because of all the fumes that have been prevalent here for the last day and a half.
All right, Gary Tuchman, and we are now looking at, we're going to be showing you live pictures of the building. We've been discussing this building at One Liberty Plaza at risk of collapse, although as you heard Gary say, there's no clear proof, there's no clear evidence that it will collapse, but it is believed that there's just a good chance that it could happen, and given the horrendous devastation that would mean, the effect on other buildings nearby, people are out of there. They have been moved blocks away, and everyone is watching this building. Close to the World Trade Center, but just giving you an idea of how many buildings are involved in what happened yesterday. And even as we watch the scenes in New York, we are back here in Washington following developments at the Pentagon. President Bush just visiting there a short time ago to inspect the damage himself. Our military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon right now. Jamie.
Well, this visit by President Bush across the Potomac River to inspect the damage here at the Pentagon was marked by a moment of high symbolism as workers, rescue workers and firefighters unfurled a huge American flag from the roof of the Pentagon and hung it over the side of the building that was took the brunt of that attack from an airliner right into the side of the building. That flag flew as President Bush personally thanked some of the rescue workers for their hard work, despite the fact that the Pentagon has now given up hope that there were any survivors left in the building. There were about 60 people injured who are being treated at area hospitals. President Bush spoke briefly to the workers and told them that this incident had simply increased his determination.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives.
The casualties in that section of the Pentagon has turned out not to be nearly as high as was initially feared. Pentagon sources now say that they think the number will end up being somewhere between 100 and 200 deaths, something that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld alluded to in a briefing earlier today.
We currently believe and are certainly hopeful that the number of casualties being reported in the press is high. As you know from your own observation out there, the work is still going forward, and we won't know for some time precise numbers.
For all intents and purposes, the fire in the Pentagon is out, although there are still some smoldering areas. Fire officials say technically the fire is simply under control. The big question now is what next? What in terms of a possible military response? That was presumably the subject of a meeting between President Bush and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld that took place in his office after this inspection. Judy?
And Jamie, I presume that means it's too soon to know what was discussed. Jamie, I just have one question. We think of people, the members of our armed forces, as being a pretty stoic bunch, if you will, but you've been covering that building for a long time, covering people in the military for quite some time. How are they affected by all this?
Well, I think it actually has resulted in a feeling of determination. There is a feeling that they were attacked, that this wasn't an accident, that it was a deliberate act. The people who described the actual evacuation of the building right in the aftermath of this incident tell me that it was people were very calm despite the tragedy that was taking place around them. And there was a real, of course, there's a real bond felt between members of the military. By the way, this wedge is basically the Navy wedge, and almost all the deaths are expected to be either in the Navy or the Army, which also had some offices nearby. But there's a real sense of resolve after this attack.
All right, Jamie McIntyre reporting from the Pentagon. Well, as we've been hearing today, as the hours have gone by, new details, dramatic details surfacing about what happened on board those planes before they crashed into the World Trade Center, into the Pentagon, and the plane that crashed into a rural area in western Pennsylvania. CNN's That Was United Airlines Flight 93. CNN's Rusty Dornan tells us more about that.
38-year-old Thomas Burnett called his wife Dina from Flight 93 4 times Tuesday. The first call, he told her his plane was hijacked. A passenger had been knifed. On the second call, his wife told him about the crash at the World Trade Center. The third, Burnett wanted details about the Trade Center crash. His wife said it was like he was puzzling it out. By the fourth call, he'd made a decision with some other passengers.
On the last phone call, he said that a group of them were getting ready to do something. And then he hung up and he never called back.
Did he say anything to you personally?
He did not. And that, I know the reason he didn't is he was fighting to come home. He had every intention of being here that night.
15 minutes before Flight 93 flew into the ground, another call. Mark Bingham, a San Francisco public relations executive, phoned his mother, Alice, who happens to be a United flight attendant. He told her he loved her.
I'm on a flight from Newark to San Francisco, and there are 3 guys that have taken over the plane, and they say they have a bomb. And I said, Mark, who are they? I said, Mark, I love you too. And I said, who are these guys? And then he seemed to be pulled away from the phone for a minute.
Hoagland says her son didn't seem panicked.
His voice was calm. He seemed very much composed, even though I know he must have been under terrible duress.
Burnett also said her husband seemed very cool. In her heart, she believes if the plane was averted from another target, her husband likely had something to do with it.
He went down fighting. I know he did. His adrenaline was going. He was not whispering. He was talking quickly, and he was ready to do something.
Wednesday at Burnett's church in San Ramon, California. A remembrance of a man whose final moments may have been spent fighting for the survival of the passengers of Flight 93. Rusty Dornan, CNN, San Francisco.
Well, once again now we are in Washington, and in order to keep you updated, just a couple of details. Investigators fanning out from Boston to Florida and beyond, pursuing any leads that they can. The FBI saying it knows the identities now of many of the hijackers. Today, as we've just told you in the last few moments, crews did hang a large, huge American flag from the Pentagon. Meantime, the Bush administration saying the plane that crashed there may have been aiming for the White House, or possibly that Air Force One was a target. And in New York City, the rescue effort at the World Trade Center is on hold. It is believed that a nearby building may be about to collapse. No survivors have been found since this morning, Wednesday morning. And now for a few moments, we want to consider what those at the Capitol and the administration and at the Pentagon have been thinking and talking about today, and that is, what does the United States do now that this unspeakable acts of terror have been committed against this nation? At the White House, our senior White House correspondent, John King. Back at the Pentagon, CNN's Jamie McIntyre. John King, to you first. Just how much are they saying openly at the White House about what their options are?
Well, Judy, we know the president met twice with his national security team today, the last time just before he headed over to the Pentagon to greet rescue and relief workers there. They're not saying very much publicly at all, except the president, of course, today calling this an act of war. What they are saying here, though, is that the president is weighing his options, and we are told by senior administrators